machine guns, and mass death. A war fought in the snow of Manchuria and the waters of the Yellow Sea. It was a war the West thought would be short and easy. But when it was over, Russia's pride lay shattered, and the world had witnessed the first great bloodbath of the 20th century. This is the story of the Russo-Japanese War, the forgotten conflict that foreshadowed the horrors of World War I. At the dawn of the 20th century, two empires were rising, and only one would survive. In the West, the Russian Empire, vast and ancient, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, stretching from Poland to the Pacific. To its rulers, expansion was destiny. Russia wanted a warm water port in the Far East, a gateway to the Pacific and the riches of Asia. In the East, a new power was emerging: Japan. Once isolated, now modernized, industrialized, and hungry for recognition. In just 40 years, Japan had transformed itself from a feudal society into a modern nation with factories, railways, and a powerful navy. Both empires wanted control of Manchuria and Korea, strategic lands between their spheres of influence. Japan tried diplomacy first. Tokyo proposed a deal. Russia could dominate Manchuria and Japan would control Korea. But in St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas II dismissed Japan as a minor Asian upstart, a yellow monkey, as some Russian officers called it. They believed the Japanese wouldn't dare fight a European empire. They were wrong. On the night of February 8, 1904, before any formal declaration of war, Japanese torpedo boats slipped quietly into the harbor of Port Arthur, Russia's main naval base in Manchuria. At 11:30 p.m., they struck. Within minutes, explosions tore through the sleeping port. Several Russian battleships were crippled. The surprise attack stunned the world. It was Pearl Harbor, 4 decades early. By morning, Japan and Russia were officially at war. In the early months, the Japanese advanced rapidly through Korea and into Manchuria. Their armies were disciplined, well-trained, and motivated. The Russians, by contrast, were disorganized, poorly supplied, and led by generals still dreaming of 19th-century glory. Yet both sides were unprepared for what modern warfare had become. Machine guns, rapid-fire artillery, and barbed wire turned open battlefields into killing grounds. Soldiers dug trenches to survive the constant bombardments. It was a grim preview of what Europe would soon face in 1914. The first major land battle came at Liaoyang, where 125,000 Japanese soldiers clashed with 150,000 Russians. After weeks of brutal combat and tens of thousands of casualties, the Russians retreated north, leaving the field littered with bodies. By late 1904, both armies were exhausted, but the bloodiest battles were yet to come. Inside, Russian soldiers endured starvation, disease, and despair. By winter, corpses froze where they fell. One officer wrote, "We are buried alive. The stench of death is everywhere." On December 31, 1904, the Russian commander, General Stoessel, surrendered. When Japanese troops entered the city, they found piles of bodies, shattered guns, and the ruins of an empire's pride. The siege had cost over 150,000 lives, and yet it was only the beginning of Russia's humiliation. Russia refused to accept defeat. The Tsar ordered reinforcements from Europe, hundreds of thousands of soldiers sent across 6,000 miles of frozen tundra on the Trans-Siberian Railway. The journey took months. The soldiers arrived exhausted, ill-equipped, and poorly led. Meanwhile, Japan's forces pressed north, determined to end the war before the Russians could regroup. In February 1905, The two armies met near the city of Mukden, one of the largest land battles the world had ever seen. Over 600,000 men clashed in a storm of gunfire, bayonets, and explosions. The battle raged for 3 weeks. At night, the frozen plains burned with artillery fire. By the end, both sides had suffered over 100,000 casualties. The Russians retreated again, shattered, starving, demoralized. One observer called it a rehearsal for the slaughter to come in Europe. But Tsar Nicholas still believed his navy could save his honor. He ordered the Baltic Fleet, Russia's pride, to sail from Europe all the way to Asia, a journey of 18,000 miles around the world. It took 8 months. By the time they reached the waters off Japan, the crews were exhausted, poorly trained, and demoralized. Waiting for them near the Tsushima Strait was the Japanese Navy, commanded by Admiral Heihachiro Togo, a genius of modern naval warfare. On May 27, 1905, the two fleets met. It was a massacre. In less than 24 hours, the Japanese sank or captured 38 of 45 Russian ships. Only a few survivors escaped. The Tsar's Grand Fleet, destroyed in a single day. Japan had achieved one of the most decisive naval victories in history. The balance of power in Asia and the world had shifted forever. When news of Tsushima reached Russia, the shock triggered riots, mutinies, and revolution. In St. Petersburg, sailors at Kronstadt mutinied. Workers filled the streets. The Tsar's empire trembled. By September 1905, both sides were ready for peace. They signed the Treaty of Portsmouth in the United States, brokered by President Theodore Roosevelt, who would later win the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. The treaty gave Japan control over Korea and southern Manchuria. Russia lost prestige, power, and pride. For Japan, it was a moment of triumph. For Russia, it was the beginning of the end. 12 years later, the Tsar and his family would be executed in the revolution that followed. The Russo-Japanese War was the first truly modern war. It had everything that would later define World War I. Trench warfare, machine guns, barbed wire, and massive artillery bombardments. Even the propaganda, nationalism, and industrial-scale killing were there, just not yet in Europe. Military observers from Britain, Germany, and France watched closely, taking notes on every tactic, every weapon. Few realized they were witnessing a rehearsal for their own destruction only 10 years later. The lessons were clear, but ignored. When the guns of August 1914 thundered across Europe, the world walked straight into the same nightmare. The human cost of the Russo-Japanese War was staggering. Nearly 130,000 Japanese and 150,000 Russians killed, hundreds of thousands more wounded or missing. Entire cities flattened, cemeteries overflowing. In Japan, victory came at a price. The economy was crippled. Taxes soared. Riots broke out in Tokyo over the peace treaty because people believed Japan deserved more. In Russia, defeat fueled resentment against the Tsar. The illusion of invincibility was gone. The people had seen their emperor's weakness, and the cracks that opened in 1905 would widen into the revolution of 1917. For the soldiers who survived, the memories never faded. The endless mud, the screams of the wounded, the ships burning on the horizon. They had seen the future of war, and it was hell. Today, the Russo-Japanese War is a footnote, overshadowed by the catastrophe that followed. But in 1905, it was the world's greatest conflict, a war that changed empires, rewrote geopolitics, and shattered the illusion of Western superiority. It proved that technology, not tradition, would decide wars, that courage alone could not stop machine guns, and that pride could kill more men than bullets ever would. So when the world marched into World War I 9 years later, the signs were already there, buried under the snow of Manchuria and the ashes of Tsushima. This was the forgotten bloodbath before World War I, a war that the world forgot, but one that shaped the century to come.